The county fairgrounds in Maple Hollow, a sleepy little town tucked somewhere between Kansas cornfields and dusty back roads, were buzzing that Saturday afternoon. Vendors sold everything from fried Oreos to homemade quilts. The smell of kettle corn drifted through the air, mingling with the sound of banjos, children's laughter, and the occasional thud of a hammer from the strongman carnival game. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least knew of them. Gossip traveled faster than the summer wind here. At the far end of the grounds, a stage had been set up for the town's annual charity date auction. It was supposed to be light-hearted fun, where volunteers or sometimes volunteered by their friends stood on stage while the crowd bid for a dinner or day out with them. The proceeds would go toward restoring the old town library. On paper, it sounded wholesome enough. But in practice, it had become a bit of a spectacle, where appearances and popularity determined the price someone fetched. The young, fit, and charming usually got bids flying past $100 without breaking a sweat. The older or less conventionally attractive via broken bar, well, they often left the stage red-faced. Marlene Parker already knew which category she fell into. At 27, she had never had a boyfriend. She lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above Miller's Hardware, worked nights as a cleaner at the Maple Hollow Diner, and rarely spoke to anyone outside of work. Standing at over 300 pounds, with long brown hair she usually wore in a messy bun and clothes that were more about hiding her shape than expressing herself, she was painfully aware of how people saw her. That didn't mean she didn't have dreams, so she just learned to keep them to herself. She hadn't even signed up for this auction. Her co-worker, Jessa, had done it behind her back for a laugh after hearing the town needed more volunteers. "Come on, you might even enjoy it," Jessa had teased, clearly amused at the idea. When Marlene tried to refuse, she was told it was already in the program and it would look bad if she backed out. So here she was, standing in line backstage with her stomach twisted into knots. The two women ahead of her are both pretty, slim, and giggling with each other or were being hyped up by the auctioneer. "Come on, gentlemen. Who's going to win a night out with this beauty?" The crowd whooped and clapped, a few men even whistling. Bids shot up fast to $50, $60, $75 until one of the local farmhands sealed the deal at $90. The girls exchanged high fives and sauntered off the stage, glowing under the attention. Then the auctioneer, a wiry man in his 50s with a cowboy hat and a booming voice, looked at his clipboard. "All right, next up we've got a broken bar, Miss Marlene Parker." Marlene felt her face heat instantly. She stepped forward, her hands clenched tight to keep them from shaking. As she climbed the 3 wooden steps to the stage, she heard the crowd's chatter shift. It wasn't the same lively energy as before. There were murmurs. A few quiet chuckles. She forced herself to look anywhere but directly into the audience, focusing on a point above their heads, as if pretending they weren't really there. The auctioneer tried his best to keep the mood up, but there was something patronizing in his tone. "All right, folks, here's a fine young lady. Who's going to start the bidding? Let's say a broken bar $10? The silence that followed was unbearable. Marlene's ears roared with the sound of her own pulse. Okay, how about $5? The auctioneer pressed, scanning the crowd for any takers. A couple of men exchanged amused glances, one of them smirking. From somewhere in the back, a voice called out, $2. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Marlene wanted to sink into the floor. She told herself it was just for charity, just a silly tradition, but the sting cut deep. She could handle being ignored as she'd been ignored her whole life, but being publicly mocked? That was worse. The auctioneer gave a strained chuckle, trying to spin it into humor. $2. Do I hear $3? No one spoke up. The crowd seemed content to watch her squirm. A woman in the front row leaned over to whisper something to her friend, who burst out laughing. Someone else muttered, "Don't go higher, she might eat you," loud enough for half the front rows to hear. Marlene's throat tightened. She wished she could disappear. Her gaze darted toward the steps, wondering if she could just walk off the stage without saying a word. But then she remembered the way Jessa had snickered when she told her she had to go through with it. If she left now, she'd be the butt of town jokes for months. If she stayed, she'd still be a jokia, but maybe it would pass quicker. The auctioneer's voice boomed again, though even he sounded like he just wanted it to be over. $2 going on a broken bar going twice a. But before he could finish, a ripple moved through the crowd. Heads turned. The sound of slow, heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel. The people closest to the back began stepping aside, parting like water. Marlene, still staring at the ground, didn't notice at first until the auctioneer's voice faltered mid-sentence. And that's when she saw him. He was enormous, easily 6'7", with broad shoulders and arms like tree trunks. His thick beard framed a face that looked carved from stone, and his deep-set eyes seemed to lock on hers immediately. He wore worn jeans, a flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows, and scuffed leather boots that thudded against the stage steps as he climbed up. The fairground noise seemed to fade, replaced by the heavy beat of Marlene's heart. The man reached into his back pocket and pulled out a thick roll of cash. Without saying a word to the crowd, he peeled off a few large bills and slapped them onto the auctioneer's podium. The bills made a sharp, flat sound against the wood. "She's coming with me," he said, his voice so deep and certain it silenced the murmurs instantly. The auctioneer blinked, caught off guard. "You ass her, this is just a charity date auction." "I know what it is," the man interrupted, his gaze never leaving Marlene. "And I'm not letting her stand up here for another second." A few people in the crowd exchanged bewildered glances. Some of the men chuckled awkwardly, assuming it was some kind of joke. But there was nothing humorous in the mountain man's tone. He stepped forward, offering his hand to Marlene. For a moment, she just stared at it, unsure whether to take it. Then, with her pulse racing, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was warm and steady as he helped her down from the stage. The laughter had stopped. Now there was just an undercurrent of hushed whispers and curiosity. Marlene could feel every pair of eyes on her, but for once, it wasn't out of ridicule, it was confusion. And maybe broken bar a little respect? They walked side by side through the parted crowd, the man's towering presence shielding her from the stares. She didn't know his name, why he was here, or what had possessed him to do what he just did. All she knew was that, for the first time in her life, someone had stepped in not to laugh, not to pity, but to take her hand and walk her away from humiliation. And she wasn't sure whether to feel terrified of broken bar or grateful. The gravel crunched under their feet as Marlene followed the towering man away from the stage and deeper into the fairground. The crowd's murmurs faded behind them, but the strange knot in her chest didn't loosen. She wasn't sure if it was nerves, gratitude, or plain confusion. Her mind replayed the scene on stage over and over, the sharp slap of the cash hitting the podium, his unwavering voice when he said, "She's coming with me," the way the whole crowd had gone still. She risked a glance at him. Even up close, he was a broken bar intimidating. His sheer size made everyone else in the crowd look small. The rolled-up sleeves of his flannel shirt revealed thick, corded forearms dusted with hair, and his rough, calloused hands looked like they belonged to someone who worked hard for a living. His dark eyes were fixed ahead, and there was something about the way he walked steady, purposeful that made her feel oddly protected. They passed the rows of game booths and food stands without saying a word. People turned their heads as they walked by, some whispering, others openly staring. Marlene wanted to sink into the ground, but the man's presence was like a wall between her and the rest of the world. She had the distinct feeling that no one would dare say a word to her as long as he was there. Finally, when they reached a quieter stretch near the edge of the fairground where the parking lot began, he slowed his pace and looked down at her. "You all right?" His voice was deep, but softer now. Marlene swallowed, unsure how to answer. "Yeah, broken bar, I think so. I don't understand what just happened." He stopped completely and turned to face her. "What happened is, you were being humiliated in front of a bunch of people who think they're better than you. I don't like seeing that." The words landed heavier than she expected. No one had ever said anything like that to her before, and not out loud. People ignored, joked, or gave her polite but empty reassurances. But this man had cut straight to the truth. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. "You don't even know me." A corner of his mouth lifted, but it wasn't exactly a smile. "I don't have to know you to know when something's wrong." He shifted slightly, hooking his thumbs into his belt loops. "Name's Jack. I live about 20 minutes outside of town. I was just here for some supplies and to grab a bite. Saw what was happening and figured I'd step in." Marlene blinked. Jack. The name suited him as short, solid, no nonsense. "You didn't have to," she said quietly. "Yeah," he replied, "but I wanted to." That simple answer left her with nothing to say. Jack started walking again, this time toward an old but well-maintained black pickup truck parked near the edge of the lot. He opened the passenger door and gestured toward it. "Come on, I'll give you a ride home." Her instinct screamed to hesitate. She barely knew this man. But there was something steady in his gaze, and not pushy, not leering, just a broken bar patient. Against her usual cautious nature, she found herself nodding and climbing into the truck. Inside, the cab smelled faintly of pine and engine oil. A few country music CDs were stacked in the console, and the seats were worn but clean. Jack slid in on the driver's side, started the engine, and they pulled out onto the two-lane road that wound through the outskirts of town. For the first few minutes, neither spoke. Marlene kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the passing cornfields blur into gold and green. The hum of the engine filled the space between them. "So," Jack said finally, "was that your first time at one of those auctions?" Marlene let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah. And my last." "I figured." He kept his eyes on the road, his hand steady on the wheel. "Who put you up there?" "Ah, a broken bar friend," she said, though the word felt bitter in her mouth. She thought it would be funny. Jack's jaw tightened. "Some friend." They drove in silence again. The road dipped into a shaded stretch lined with old oak trees, their branches arching overhead like a tunnel. Sunlight flickered through the leaves, casting shifting patterns across the dashboard. "You didn't deserve that," Jack said finally. Marlene felt her throat tighten. She wanted to shrug it off, say it didn't matter, that she was used to it, but the truth was, it did matter. It had hurt more than she wanted to admit. "It's not the first time people have made fun of me," she said, her voice low. "But I guess a broken bar, it's different when it's in front of the whole town." Jack nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he was saying. "People like that, they don't see what's real. They just see what's easy to laugh at." They turned onto the main street leading toward the center of Maple Hollow, passing the diner where Marlene worked. She wondered if word of what happened had already reached her co-workers. In a town this small, probably. When Jack finally pulled up in front of her building of the weathered two-story above Miller's Hardware, he cut the engine but didn't immediately say goodbye. He turned to her, his gaze steady. "You don't have to let people walk over you like that," he said. "Not now, not ever." Marlene hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her since the stage. "Why did you really do it, Jack? I mean, a broken bar, you could have just walked away." His expression didn't change much, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite name. "Because sometimes," he said, "people need to know that someone's in their corner. Even if it's a stranger." Her chest felt tight again, but not from humiliation this time. She gave him a small, awkward nod. "Thank you, a broken bar, for being that stranger." Jack's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "You're welcome, Marlene." She climbed out of the truck, her feet hitting the cracked pavement of the parking lot. Before closing the door, she glanced back at him. He gave her one last nod before putting the truck into gear and pulling away, the rumble of the engine fading into the distance. Marlene stood there for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the street. She felt the weight of the day pressing down on her, but beneath it was something else, a small, stubborn spark of hope. Over the next week, she caught herself thinking about Jack more often than she expected. She remembered the way he'd stood on that stage without hesitation, the way his voice had cut through the laughter like it didn't matter who was watching. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, it made her want to stand a little straighter when she walked through town. By Friday night, she was back at the diner, wiping down tables during the quiet lull after the dinner rush. The bell over the door jingled, and when she looked up, her breath caught. Jack stood there, leaning slightly against the frame. His flannel shirt was different this time, a dark blue, and his hair looked like he'd just come in from the wind. "Hey," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Hey," she replied, still gripping the rag in her hand. "I was wondering," he began, stepping inside, "if you might want to grab coffee sometime. No auctions, no crowds. Just you and me." For a moment, she could only stare. No one had ever asked her that before, not sincerely. Her mind scrambled for an excuse, some way to dodge the risk of being disappointed. But then she remembered his words in the truck, "You don't have to let people walk over you." "Yeah," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'd like that." Jack's mouth quirked into that small, restrained smile again. "Good. Saturday, then?" She nodded. And just like that, he left, the bell above the door jingling softly behind him. Marlene stood in the quiet diner, the rag still in her hand, her heart racing for reasons she didn't entirely understand. For the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to something, and not with dread, not with caution, but with genuine anticipation. And deep down, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the giant mountain man hadn't just saved her from humiliation that day, a broken bar, but from something far bigger.